I should have left that dusty box alone, but the truth has a way of calling your name. That was the thought running through my mind the morning I found it, my hands trembling, the sun slicing through the attic window just enough to catch the dust floating around me like disturbed ghosts. I don't even know what led me up there. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way grief shows up months after someone is gone, tugging gently at your sleeves like a child too shy to speak. My grandfather had been gone for 8 months. 8 months of quiet dinners, empty holidays, and a lingering sense that we all missed something we never truly bothered to know. People always said he was a quiet man. Reserved. Steady. But I used to wonder if quiet people are quiet because they have nothing to say. Or because they're holding back more than anyone realizes. That morning, I found out which one he was. The attic ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed, the old wood complaining like it had been waiting years to be disturbed. The air was thick, the kind that smells of old paper, forgotten winters, and the faint sweetness of cedar. My mother always promised she'd clean this place one day, but after Grandpa passed, no one wanted to come up here. Maybe we were scared to be surrounded by his things. Maybe it made the loss too real. I pulled the string for the single bulb that hung from the beams above me. The light flickered, a dim, yellow heartbeat, and then steadied. That's when I saw it. A small box tucked behind his old radio, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. It was wooden, darkened by age, with brass corners that had greened over time. On top was a faded photograph, so worn it looked like it had lived several lives before reaching my hands. The picture was of my grandfather as a young man, sitting in front of some kind of canvas tent, his jaw tight, his smile trying its best but not quite reaching his eyes. I didn't remember ever seeing the picture before. When I lifted the box, something inside shifted softly, like paper sighing. The lock was old, rusted, almost decorative at this point. I brushed my thumb over it, debating. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. There is something about stumbling onto another person's past that makes you feel guilty, even if that person is gone. I whispered, "Grandpa, am I supposed to see this?" My voice sounded too loud in the small attic. I don't know what I expected, some sign, some stirring of air, some sense of wrongness. Instead, everything remained still. Quiet in that heavy way that feels like an invitation. So I opened it. The latch snapped with a tired click, and the lid rose as if it had been waiting. Inside were 3 leather-bound books, edges frayed, the spines cracked from use. The covers were scratched, stained, water-damaged in places, like they'd lived through storms and years and rough hands. I picked up the first one. The leather felt soft, almost velvety, worn down by time and friction. I opened it to the first page. And there it was, his handwriting. The same looping, slanted script he always used to write birthday cards and grocery lists. But this wasn't a shopping reminder or a gentle holiday blessing. The first line was blunt, raw. "If someone ever finds this, then you will finally know who I really was." My breath hitched. I felt a chill despite the still summer heat trapped in the attic. I sat down on an old crate, the wood groaning under me, and read the next line. "War changes a man long before he ever steps onto a battlefield." There was no date. No place name. Nothing to anchor it in time. Just his words, steady, measured, but heavy in a way I wasn't prepared for. I kept reading. He described being young, barely more than a boy, swept into a conflict he didn't understand. He didn't mention sides or countries. Only our unit, the valley, the border, the camp. Ambiguity that somehow made it feel more universal, more haunting. He wrote about long marches through terrain that shifted from dust to mud to snow. About comrades who laughed loudly to hide their fear, men who shaved with cold water and sang softly at night to muffle the explosions echoing in the distance. He talked about the silence between battles, how it was never truly quiet, just a different kind of loud. Then the tone shifted. The paragraph grew shakier, the ink darker in places as if the pen had pressed too hard. The first time I thought I wouldn't make it home was the night the ridge fell. I closed the diary for a moment. my throat felt tight. This wasn't a story he'd ever told at the dinner table, between spoonfuls of mashed potatoes. He used to dismiss questions with a gentle laugh and wave of his hand. "Oh, sweetheart, nothing interesting. Long days, tired legs. That's all." I swallowed hard and opened the diary again. His description of the ridge wasn't dramatic, no heroic flair, no embellishment. He wrote with the calm of someone who survived but left a part of himself behind. He described scrambling through loose rock, hearing shouts swallowed by wind, the earth trembling as something exploded nearby. He mentioned a friend, just one name, Dallin. A man who'd joked hours earlier about wanting nothing more than a hot bath and a cold drink. Dallin didn't survive the night. My stomach tightened as I read the line where Grandpa wrote. I didn't have time to be afraid until it was over. The words landed heavily. Soft but devastating. I kept going until the entries blurred, my eyes stinging. I wasn't prepared for how intimate his writing was, how honest. It felt like stepping into a room I had no right to be in. Eventually, I closed the diary gently and held it to my chest. I had known my grandfather my whole life. And yet, after just a few pages, I felt like I was meeting him for the first time. Downstairs, I heard my mother calling my name faintly, but her voice felt miles away. I wasn't ready to leave the attic. I wasn't ready to stop reading. Something in me knew that whatever was in these diaries, it was just the beginning. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Because the truth was calling. And it wasn't done speaking yet. I didn't go back downstairs right away. Instead, I stayed in the attic a few minutes longer, letting the weight of everything settle. Eventually, when I finally stood and made my way down the creaking ladder, the diary tucked under my arm, it felt like I was carrying something alive, fragile, pulsing, unfinished. My mother met me in the hallway with a dish towel slung over her shoulder, her hair pulled back into the familiar loose bun she wore when she was cleaning or stressed, or both. "There you are," she said, brushing dust off my sleeves without waiting for permission. "I was starting to wonder if you fell through the attic floor." Her eyes drifted to the diary in my hands. She froze. "What's that?" I hesitated. "It was in a box up there. I think Grandpa wrote it." Her face softened, but there was something else beneath it, a flicker of apprehension. A tightening of her jaw she probably didn't even notice. "Oh," she murmured. Those? I repeated. She shook her head too quickly. "I mean, he wrote a lot of things. Notes, lists, little stories. He was always scribbling." But the way she said it told me she wasn't surprised. Not at all. She wiped her hands and turned back toward the kitchen. "Come help me finish lunch," she said. "We can talk later." That was her way. My mother believed in timing, in letting things settle, in never rushing pain. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just avoiding the topic, she was afraid of it. I followed her into the kitchen, where the smell of simmering tomatoes hung in the air, earthy and warm. The window over the sink was open, and the breeze stirred the curtains gently. Everything looked normal, sunlight on the table, the old ticking clock, 2 mismatched placemats waiting for us. But nothing felt normal. Not anymore. As we chopped vegetables and stirred pots, I kept glancing at the diary on the counter. Its worn cover almost seemed to absorb the light, pulling everything toward it. "Mom," I said finally, "did you know Grandpa had diaries? Like, real ones?" She paused mid-stir. Her shoulders rose slowly with her breath, then lowered. "I knew he wrote things down," she said quietly. "But he never talked about it. And we never asked." "Why not?" She gave a sad, tired smile. "Because some memories don't need audience. And your grandfather, he had a lot of those." There it was again, that tone of finality, a boundary placed gently but firmly. But all it did was make me more curious. After lunch, while she rinsed dishes, I caught her looking at the diary again. Her eyes softened, but the sadness didn't hide well. He was a good man, she said, almost to herself. Whatever's in there, remember that first. I nodded slowly. But inside, questions kept churning. That night, after everyone was asleep, I took the diary upstairs to my room. I set it on the bed and turned on my small desk lamp. The soft yellow glow made the room feel intimate, almost sacred. My hands trembled a little as I opened the cover again. There was a dried flower pressed between 2 pages, so fragile that when I touched it, a petal crumbled. Its color long gone, only the shape remained. Grandpa had placed it there intentionally. A memory preserved. I turned to the next entry. The day the unit moved camp, we passed through a village that had already lost more than we ever could. I saw people with eyes that weren't afraid anymore, they were empty. That scared me more than gunfire ever could. I felt my throat tighten. It was strange reading such raw vulnerability from a man who, in my entire life, never once raised his voice or shed a tear in front of us. The entry continued with descriptions of children running barefoot through dust, of old men carrying heavy buckets with trembling hands, of women who paused their work to watch the soldiers pass, not with hatred, not with hope, just with resignation. He mentioned giving his rations to a boy who looked no older than 8. He smiled as if I'd handed him the world. That line made my chest ache. I turned the page. That's when I saw it. A small symbol drawn in the corner. Not part of the writing, not decoration, almost a code. A triangle with a line through it. I frowned. I didn't remember ever seeing Grandpa draw symbols in anything. I flipped through the pages quickly. There it was again. And again. Appearing only on certain entries. What did it mean? Why mark some memories but not others? I reached the section where the handwriting changed. Not dramatically, just a slight tremor. Letters that leaned a bit more. Ink darker, heavier. He wrote. We were told the valley was safe. It wasn't. We were told the night would be quiet. It wasn't. And we were told all of us would return home. We didn't. A slow chill crawled down my spine. I traced the symbol in the corner with my finger. Whatever happened in this section, this was where his silence began. This was the part of him he never brought home, never shared, never let surface in any of the stories he didn't tell. And suddenly, I understood. This diary wasn't written for himself. It wasn't written to process. It wasn't written to forget. It was written for someone who would one day need to know. Someone like me. I closed the diary and stared at the ceiling, the shadows from my lamp shifting softly. There was something buried here, something deeper than loss or fear or regret. Something Grandpa had carried quietly through decades of dinners, birthdays, and gentle smiles. And I had only scratched the surface. One question burned hotter than all the rest. Why did he hide this from us? And what else was in the other diaries? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the symbol, the small, simple mark that held too much meaning to be accidental. And I knew. I wasn't done. Not even close. Not with this diary. And certainly not with the other 2. The next morning, sunlight struck my room far too brightly for how little sleep I'd gotten. I pushed myself out of bed, still thinking about that symbol, the triangle with the line through it. It hovered in my mind like an unfinished sentence. Downstairs, the house was unusually quiet. My mother had already left for work, leaving a note on the fridge. Went in early today. Breakfast is in the oven. And, please be gentle with whatever you read. The last line felt like both a warning and a blessing. I ate quickly, barely tasting anything, and then carried the diary with me to the backyard. The air was cool, and the old tree swing creaked softly as I sat down. I rested the diary on my knee. There was one part of the attic I hadn't touched yet. The old metal trunk. The one my grandfather told us never to open. I closed the diary. Today. I was opening it. The attic felt different this time, heavier, like stepping back into a memory I'd interrupted. Dust particles drifted lazily in the warm light filtering through the single window. The metal trunk sat exactly where I'd seen it yesterday, dented, rusted at the hinges, a padlock hanging from the latch. The lock wasn't special, just old. And old things break easily. I gripped the lock and pulled. It snapped open. My pulse quickened. Inside, I found a folded military-style jacket, a tin box with matches, dried leaves, and a metal dog tag. A bundle of letters tied with a string. And, my breath hitched, a second diary. This one wasn't worn the same way as the first. It was thicker. Heavier. And instead of brown leather, it was dark green. I picked it up, hands trembling. I didn't open it yet. Not until I looked through everything else. I untied the letters. Most had no envelopes, just dated pages folded over themselves. But one letter startled me. Because it wasn't written by my grandfather. It was addressed to him. To Thomas. If you are reading this, then the valley took more from you than it had the right to. My eyes widened. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharper, younger. The tone was urgent yet careful. This wasn't a casual message between friends. This was a confession. Or a warning. The letter continued. You must never tell anyone what happened that night. Not your family. Not your commanders. Not yourself, if you can help it. A chill went through me. Destroy your notes. Destroy mine. Do not let the symbol spread. The symbol. My heart pounded painfully. I lowered the letter and stared at the diary on my lap. Was this what he had marked? What he didn't destroy? I read the final line of the letter. If you can't forget, then bury it deep. For all our sakes. There was no signature. No name. Just a small drawing at the bottom. A triangle. With a line through it. Exactly like the one in Grandpa's diary. My fingers felt numb. Whatever happened in that valley, it wasn't just traumatic. It was secret. Hidden intentionally. By more than one person. I reached for the green diary, diary number 2. I opened it slowly. The first page wasn't dated. It wasn't even a journal entry. It was a list. If the mark returns, do not speak of it. Do not follow it. Do not trust the messenger. Leave immediately. Protect the child. Protect the child? Who was the child? My stomach twisted. Had Grandpa written this? Or someone else? The handwriting looked different, more rushed, less steady. Maybe older. Maybe scared. I turned the page. This time, there was a date. And it was written decades after the war. Meaning he kept writing long after coming home. He hadn't left the war behind at all. The entry began. It happened again today. I saw the mark outside the hardware store, someone carved it into the bench. My breath caught. I told myself it was graffiti. Kids. Coincidence. But I know better. My heartbeat was in my ears. Why would a symbol from a war show up in his hometown years later? I read on. I followed it once. Never again. Never. The next line was smudged, as if he'd pressed the pen down too hard. If it ever reaches this house, I must do what I couldn't do back then. What does that mean? What couldn't he do? My chest tightened as I turned the page again. At the bottom of the next entry, written faintly, almost erased, were 4 words. They will come again. I felt my throat go dry. This was not just a diary. This was a warning. A message he hoped someone, me, would eventually read. Suddenly, a voice echoed from downstairs. Hello? Anyone home? I nearly dropped the diary. It was my mother, hours earlier than usual. I closed the book and climbed down the attic stairs quickly, my heart racing. She stood in the hallway, key still in her hand, looking pale. "Mom? You're home early. I needed to talk to you," she said softly. "About your grandfather." My pulse thudded in my ears. Her eyes drifted to my hands. "Is that the green one?" she whispered. You knew about it?" Her expression crumpled, and for the first time, she looked afraid. "I prayed you wouldn't find it," she said. "Because once you start reading, there's no going back." I swallowed hard. "Mom, what is the symbol? What does it mean?" She didn't answer immediately. She closed her eyes. She exhaled slowly. And then she finally said, "It means the past didn't stay buried." My mother stood there in the hallway, still holding her keys, but looking as though they weighed 100 pounds. She didn't move. She didn't blink. It was as if seeing that green diary had dragged her back into a memory she spent years trying to bury. I swallowed. "Mom, please. Tell me what you know." She motioned toward the living room. "Sit down," she whispered. "Because this isn't something I can say twice." We sat across from each other, me clutching the diary, her twisting her hands anxiously in her lap. "When did you first see this?" I began. Her eyes softened with something like guilt. "I was around your age," she admitted. "Your grandfather showed it to me one night, when he thought he was dying." My breath caught. "You knew he had a second diary all these years?" She nodded, tears building. "Yes. And I promised him I would keep it hidden. That no one, not even you, would ever read it." "Why?" My voice cracked. "What is so dangerous it had to stay locked away?" Mom looked down at her hands before answering. "Because your grandfather wasn't just a soldier," she said quietly. "He was part of something he never wanted to remember." The room felt suddenly too small. Too quiet. Like the air had thickened around us. I opened the diary to the page with the strange list, the warnings about the symbol returning. She froze when her eyes fell on it. "You shouldn't have read that," she whispered. "Why does it say protect the child?" "What child?" I demanded. She hesitated. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. "Me," she said. I was the child. I felt the earth shift under my feet. "What? That doesn't make sense." "He wrote that decades after the war." "I know." Mom brushed a shaking hand across her cheek. "Because the danger didn't end when the war did. It followed him home." My heart thudded painfully. "Mom, what danger? What happened out there? What is this symbol?" She looked toward the window as if expecting to see the mark carved into the glass. Then, in a trembling voice, she finally said, "The symbol belonged to a unit your grandfather worked with, a special group the army never acknowledged. They were sent on missions that weren't supposed to exist." I sat forward. "Black Ops?" "Not exactly." She shook her head. "These weren't missions against enemy soldiers. They were cleanup operations." My skin prickled. "Cleanup, of what?" She hugged her arms around herself. "Of places. Villages. Sites where something happened, something the army wanted erased." "What kind of something?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She laid it on the coffee table with trembling fingers. "Your grandfather gave me this," she said. "He said if I ever saw this symbol near our home, I needed to leave." Immediately, I unfolded the paper. My stomach dropped. It was a hand-drawn map of a valley, long, narrow, and marked with that same triangle symbol at the center. On the side, in Grandpa's handwriting, were 4 words. "Do not go back." I looked up sharply. "Back? Back where? What happened in that valley?" Mom closed her eyes as tears slid down her cheeks. "You're thinking of soldiers," she whispered. But what your grandfather faced wasn't soldiers. The silence rang in my ears. I tried to breathe, but the room felt airless. What do you mean? I asked. What did he see out there? She shook her head. He never told me exactly. But he said it wasn't human. A cold tremor shot down my spine. Mom, that doesn't make sense. I know. I didn't believe him either, she whispered. Until the night something appeared outside my window when I was 9. My entire body tensed. Something? My voice was barely a breath. What did you see? She pressed her lips together, fighting for composure. I woke up because your grandfather was screaming downstairs. He hardly ever screamed, you know that. I ran to the hall, and that's when I saw the shadow through the front door. A shadow? A figure, she corrected. Tall. Thin. Wrong. It just stood there, silent, like it was waiting. My heartbeat turned into a hammer. Grandpa grabbed me, she continued, and he shoved me behind him. He yelled at it, yelled the same words he'd written in that diary, I won't follow you again. I won't. What happened? I whispered. It left, she said. Or, disappeared. I don't know. But your grandfather made us pack that night. We stayed in a motel for a week. He wouldn't let me near the windows. A shaky breath escaped me. So that's why he was so nervous around doors and windows, I muttered. Mom nodded. He told me the symbol marked places where the boundary between what he saw and our world was thin. I stared at her. You believe him now, don't you? She wiped her eyes. I spent years trying not to. But when you found the diaries, when things started reappearing, I knew. I stiffened. What things? Mom looked at me with a haunted expression. The mark, she whispered. Someone carved it on the back fence 2 nights ago. My blood ran cold. What? I didn't want to scare you. I painted over it before you woke up. But now that you've read the diary. Her voice broke. I think whatever haunted him has finally come back. The house suddenly felt colder. Quieter. The kind of quiet where every sound feels wrong. So what do we do? I asked, my voice trembling. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. We finish reading the diaries, she said. And then, we decide whether to run. The next morning, sunlight poured across the kitchen table as I opened the green diary again. I had spent hours thinking about my mother's words the night before, how the mark wasn't supernatural, how my grandfather had carried his memories silently for decades. And yet, the weight of them pressed against me as though they were alive. I flipped to the page where he had listed the instructions about the symbol. If the mark returns, do not speak. Do not follow. Protect the child. I traced the triangle in the corner. It wasn't mystical. It wasn't supernatural. It was a reminder, an anchor to the fear and trauma he carried from that valley. I realized then that my grandfather had lived with constant vigilance, not because someone or something was hunting him, but because he had seen too much, endured too much, and had never let himself be free. That symbol was a silent testament to the horrors he'd witnessed, and the guilt he had carried for surviving when others hadn't. I closed the diary for a moment and leaned back in the chair, letting the morning sun warm my arms. I could feel it, the weight of his memory pressing down, the kind of heavy that doesn't leave you, even after decades. That afternoon, I went through the first diary again, the one I had found in the wooden box. I read the entries about the marches, the villages, the small acts of kindness and bravery amidst chaos. And slowly, I began to see a pattern. My grandfather's diaries weren't just accounts of war. They were his way of processing grief, guilt, and trauma, his own personal therapy written down for the day he could no longer speak them aloud. And then I understood why he had hidden them. Not to protect anyone from something supernatural, not to keep a secret from the world. But because he had been trying to protect himself, and us, from the unbearable weight of his memories. When my mother came home from work, I had a quiet moment to talk with her. "Mom," I said, "I think I understand now. The diaries, the symbol, it wasn't about something coming after him. It was about what he couldn't escape inside himself." She nodded, a faint tear sliding down her cheek. "Yes. He never wanted us to see that side of him. The fear he felt. The guilt. The nights he couldn't sleep." I thought about the small triangle in the corner of the pages. It wasn't a warning of danger, it was a warning of memory. A mark to remember the past without letting it consume him completely. "I feel like he's still here," I whispered. "Not physically, of course. But his presence. The weight of what he carried, it's like I can feel it now." Mom reached over and took my hand. "He wanted you to know, someday. Not to live in fear, but to understand." We sat in silence for a long while. The air in the kitchen felt heavy but safe, grounded by the smell of her simmering stew and the faint hum of the refrigerator. For the first time, I felt a sense of connection, not just to my grandfather, but to the history he had borne quietly, patiently, like a stone sinking in a river. That evening, I returned to the attic, carefully placing the first diary on the crate beside the green one. I opened both and began cross-referencing the entries, noting the moments where he had written about Dallin, the marches, the villages, and the acts of kindness amidst horror. It was painstaking work, but it helped me understand the chronology of his internal battles, the moments when fear overcame him, and when courage pushed him forward. I realized something profound: my grandfather's war wasn't just the battles he fought outside. It was the battles he fought inside himself for decades afterward, the quiet heroism of enduring trauma without letting it destroy the family he loved. By the time night fell, I had a clearer picture of the man I had always admired, yet never fully understood. The diaries had become more than records of war. They were a testament to the resilience of a man who bore unimaginable suffering and carried it silently, shaping the person he was in the home, in the family, and in the moments of tenderness we had shared. I closed the diaries gently and whispered a quiet thank you. "I understand now, Grandpa. I see you. I see everything you lived through." That night, I slept for the first time in months without the oppressive weight of unanswered questions pressing down. The past was still heavy, yes, but it was now a story I could carry with me, one that gave context, depth, and meaning to the quiet man I had loved all my life. The attic felt different the next day, less like a repository of secrets and more like a bridge to understanding. I spent hours reading and reflecting, recording my thoughts in a journal of my own. I realized that the symbol, the diaries, and the hidden memories were not threats. They were lessons. They were invitations to empathy, understanding, and resilience. And I knew that one day, I would share this story, not to terrify, not to shock, but to honor the sacrifices, the courage, and the quiet heroism of the man I thought I knew, but now truly understood. The following weekend, I decided it was time. I couldn't carry these diaries and their weight alone any longer. I called my mother into the living room early in the morning, asking her to sit with me. The sunlight fell softly through the curtains, catching the dust motes in the air like tiny floating memories. "I think it's time we tell your siblings," I said, my voice unsteady. "Not everything. Just the parts about Grandpa that we never knew." She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I think he would want that," she said quietly. By afternoon, my aunt and uncle had arrived. The house smelled faintly of coffee and the lingering aroma of fresh bread my mother had baked. We gathered in the living room, the three of them on the sofa, me with the two diaries on the coffee table between us. I took a deep breath. "I found Grandpa's diaries," I began. "And they're more than just stories from the war. They're his memories, his fears, his courage, everything he never said aloud." At first, my aunt laughed nervously. "Oh, I've heard he kept a few notebooks, but nothing serious," she said. I opened the brown diary to a random page and read aloud an entry where he had described sharing his rations with a boy in a village. His handwriting trembled slightly as he recounted the child's smile. As I read, the room fell quiet. My uncle's hand tightened around his coffee mug. My aunt's eyes welled with tears. It's him, my uncle whispered. All those years, he never talked about the things he saw, the things he did. And here it is, written down. I flipped to the green diary. The pages were heavier, darker in tone, filled with careful warnings and reflections on the weight he carried long after the war ended. See, I said, this symbol, he used it to mark things he couldn't forget. It wasn't a warning for anyone else. It was his way of surviving, of remembering without letting it destroy him. My aunt let out a shaky laugh, wiping her eyes. I always thought he was quiet because he was just reserved. I never realized he carried so much inside him. We read together for hours. Some passages were heartbreaking, stories of loss, fear, and exhaustion. Others revealed tiny moments of joy, of humanity, and resilience. Each entry reshaped the image we had of him, turning a quiet, gentle man into someone who had lived through horrors we couldn't fully imagine, yet had always found a way to return home whole enough to love us. By the end of the day, the diaries had done something miraculous. They had turned grief into connection. They had given us a new way to know the man we thought we understood, and in that knowing, we found a strange, comforting intimacy. That evening, my mother and I stayed behind after my aunt and uncle left. She touched the green diary gently. He was so careful with this, she said. Even after everything, he didn't want us burdened with his pain. And yet, here we are, sharing it anyway. I think he'd be proud. I nodded. It's more than that. He wanted us to understand. To feel his choices, his courage, his regrets. And to learn from them. Mom smiled softly. And you're right. We do learn from him. From his silence. From his courage. From the weight he bore so quietly. I opened the brown diary again and traced the lines where he had written about small acts of kindness amidst despair. It makes me think about what we carry today, I said. The fears we hide, the mistakes we regret, and the moments of courage we overlook in ourselves and in others. Mom placed her hand over mine. We carry it all differently, she said. But we can honor him by acknowledging it, by living with courage too. I realized then that the diaries weren't just a record of the past, they were a guide for the present. They reminded us that bravery isn't only about battlefields or epic gestures. It's about living fully in the face of fear, carrying your history with grace, and passing understanding to the next generation. That night, I placed both diaries carefully on the shelf. They had been uncovered, shared, and respected. And in doing so, a new chapter began, not in the diaries, but in us. We had discovered our grandfather anew, and in that discovery, we discovered ourselves, our capacity to understand, to feel deeply, and to carry the past without being crushed by it. And for the first time, I felt the full depth of his legacy, not just as a soldier, not just as a survivor, but as a man who loved quietly, fiercely, and completely, leaving behind lessons that time cannot erase. The following morning, the house felt lighter, as though the weight of decades had been lifted slightly, shared between us. I sat at the kitchen table, a notebook open before me, not to write a diary, but to record reflections, lessons, small insights, things I wanted to remember about my grandfather and about how courage can be quiet, unnoticed, yet profoundly real. Mom joined me with a cup of tea. The steam curled up in gentle spirals, warm and calming. Have you thought about what we should do with the diaries? She asked. I nodded slowly. I don't think they should stay hidden. But I also don't think we should rush to publish them or share them with the world. These are his memories, his reflections, private, but powerful. We can honor him by preserving them carefully. She smiled faintly. I was thinking the same thing. Maybe we digitize them, create a family archive, a way to keep the stories safe for generations to come. So no one loses them, and yet we respect the privacy he wanted. I felt a deep sense of calm. After all the shock, the late-night discoveries, the raw emotions, there was something grounding about this choice, something that honored both the man and the family he loved. We spent the next few days carefully scanning the pages, preserving the worn edges and the faded ink in digital form. Each time I paused, I read a passage aloud to Mom, and sometimes to my siblings when they stopped by. It was a slow, deliberate process, and each reading brought tears, laughter, and reflection. One evening, after finishing the last page of the Green Diary, I sat back and realized something profound. My grandfather's bravery wasn't only in the actions he had taken during the war. It was in how he carried it, quietly, and how he lived afterward, with humility, love, and restraint. His legacy wasn't about glory or recognition, it was about endurance, compassion, and the choices he made even when no one was watching. I looked at Mom. "He trusted us," I said softly. "Even though he didn't tell us everything directly, he trusted that we would understand, and that we would carry his story responsibly." Mom nodded, her eyes shining. "It's a gift," she said. "Not just the diaries, but the insight into who he really was. And it's up to us to honor it properly." I thought about my own life, the struggles and small fears that sometimes felt overwhelming. Grandpa's diaries reminded me that courage isn't always dramatic, it's quiet, sustained, and persistent. It's making the hard choices when no one is watching. It's facing trauma and still choosing to love, to nurture, to protect those who depend on you. That night, as I closed the notebooks and the scanned files saved safely on the computer, I whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Grandpa. For everything. For trusting me. For leaving me your story." I realized that the diaries had changed not only how I saw my grandfather, but how I saw myself. I carried the lessons forward, ready to face life with a little more courage, a little more patience, and a lot more understanding of what people endure silently. Over the next few weeks, the family gathered occasionally to read favorite passages, to discuss small insights, and to share personal reflections. The diaries became a living part of our conversations, a bridge between the past and present. Each discussion left us with deeper empathy for my grandfather, and for one another. I also made a quiet decision: I would keep a personal journal moving forward. Not because I feared future danger or had secrets to hide, but because recording life, its struggles, its joys, its lessons, felt like the most fitting tribute to the man who taught me the quiet power of resilience. And so, the diaries rested on the shelf in the living room, carefully preserved, a testament to a life lived with bravery, humility, and love. The green and brown covers faded with time, but their contents would never fade. They were now part of our family, a story to guide future generations in understanding the weight of courage, the depth of human experience, and the profound impact of living with integrity, even in silence. In the quiet moments, I sometimes imagine Grandpa sitting beside me, smiling gently, proud that his life, once burdened with secrecy and trauma, now shines as a quiet beacon of resilience. And I know that, through these diaries, his legacy will endure, not as tales of horror or mystery, but as lessons of endurance, empathy, and the power of carrying one's history with dignity. Sitting in the living room that evening, the diaries resting quietly on the shelf, I felt a deep sense of peace. What had begun as a puzzling attic discovery had grown into something far greater than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about secrets or history, it was about understanding, empathy, and carrying the weight of those who came before us with care. I thought about my grandfather, the quiet man I had always admired. Now I understood him fully, the sacrifices he made, the fears he carried, the courage he displayed not on battlefields alone, but in the way he lived his life afterward. His story taught me that bravery often looks quiet from the outside. It is found in resilience, patience, and the love that persists even in the hardest times. I also thought about family, about how sharing the diaries brought us closer, helped us see each other's vulnerabilities, and reminded us that understanding is often the best form of connection. These lessons aren't just about history, they are about how we live today, how we approach our own fears, and how we honor the lives of those who came before us. And now, I leave you with a question, my friends: how often do we overlook the quiet heroism in the people we love? How often do we carry unspoken stories of sacrifice, fear, or courage that shape our lives in ways we don't always see? If you have your own family stories, memories, or discoveries, I invite you to reflect on them, share them, and honor the legacies quietly waiting to be understood. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have done the same if you found a story like this? And subscribe for more real-life, emotional stories every week.